This is the beginning of the third movement, which, as you can see, definitely starts off with a lot of texture in the piano part, and nothing at all for the strings to do for the first few bars here. So this is a very solemn feel to it. It doesn't hurry up. It doesn't have any kind of celebratory feel. It's very, very stately, could be a good word to describe this. We have got the key change here into D major, which again is one of those third relationships from the B flat that we started the piece in, now to the D major. We also have another second beat emphasis. Although this is in 3, you really feel that a lot of times this emphasis comes in on that second beat. Doesn't quite fall in these bars where you've got the note kind of falling in as an appoggiatura here, but it does work on a few of these bars where we're really emphasizing the start of this theme. So what is the theme would be a good question to answer. Well, you can pick out really the top line of this piano part, and this is something that you'll see repeating and developing as we go through this movement. Now really this movement is a set of variations, so you will see some variations that are easier to recognize and easier to compare back to the theme than others, but it's useful to think of this theme moving in quite stepwise motion as you go through the piece. Harmonically, a lot of it is straightforward. So again, we've got this D major tonality starting off with a nice tonic chord here. And it's really going to continue with a lot of triads for a while. There is a little bit of an unusual chord here, which leads us to this A. We don't usually have this G sharp in the key of D major. So this could be a short modulation here in A. If you think of this here as a dominant heading in towards that tonic in A. The other piece of kind of weirdness comes here, where we have the F natural and the D sharp, both kind of sticking out from the key of D, and actually this makes an augmented 6 as well. So this is going to be one of those augmented 6 or a French 6 chord. So we're still really thinking about being in the key of A here, which I actually notate here. This is going to be the 5th with the E, but we've got a bit of resolution from the augmented 6 going on here as well. So we've got the F natural heading down to an E. That D sharp doesn't do it straight away, but eventually goes up to an E as well. So we've got those heading in opposite directions to resolve that augmented interval. So in here we've kind of got passing notes getting into the chord, which if you can think of notes in the middle like that as passing notes, that can make it a little bit easier sometimes to classify what chord you have. And we have some 7th chords as we go forward here as well. So the strings, of course, come in at the end of this bar here. It's worth pausing to notice, where do they get the theme? Do they get the theme straight away? Or really, they get it after this little introduction here. The violin has that melody that matches the upper line of that piano part from previously. And over here we're back in the key of D. So we are really having that home key of D, even though we went into A major previously. So there's not a lot to comment on in terms of chords, lots of tonic and dominant here, some sevenths as well. But we do have things like anticipations to look out for here. This could be one of those movements where you might be able to find a lot of examples of really specific things. So things like anticipations, things like passing tones, different types of passing notes, for example, would be useful to look out for in this movement. Similarly, we also have examples of cadences and cadential 6/4s, just for an example, which we've got down here, which we could label out as having the 1C or the 1/6/4 here, and the 5 chord here. So this is your cadence, making it in perfect cadence. Or is it? Eventually, we could go further along here, and actually, of course, it's useful probably to think of this as a seventh, a dominant seventh. Over here, we do get our tonic resolution. So it's that cadential pattern, 1/6/4, 5/7/1, or 1C, 5/7A, 1A. As we go a little bit further on, we can still look out for our melody. Of course, it disappears from the strings again, but it goes back into the piano part, not setting off at exactly the same pitch this time. We've got, of course, a different shift there, but we've got the same overall melodic pattern, with a little bit extra on the end of this one, where we've got the increased chromaticism and the increased number of notes even in those bars. Just in terms of things to look out for, again, this here we've got an appoggiatura. There's a few examples of this throughout this section, where we've got this chord actually resolving onto the second quaver beat rather than landing perfectly on that chord. So this is resolving downwards for both of those E's in that case. We will also have passing 6/4s. So for example, in here, we've got a second inversion chord here, which is passing down or up, depending on which line you're looking at. So those are useful to look out for too. So as I said, we've got quite a lot of chromaticism here, kind of bringing us a bit of a sense of flux, and we get something a little bit different as we move in towards the end of this initial section. Now, helpfully in this section, we've got these double bar lines, mostly pointing out the start of a new variation for us. So as I said, it is a series of variations. Whenever you see one of these double bar lines, that's a good clue to suggest that you're going to have a variation next. So a lot of this in the preceding bars is really kind of giving us a bit of instability as we get to the end of the introductory section, and it's sort of an extended cadence. It does come up and finish with this A, C sharp, E, G, which resolves into the A, D, F, and of course a D in the bottom, in the bass there as well. So ending in D major still, bit of an extension before we get to that point, but this is going to bring us then to the end of that variation. So when you first look at variation 1, if you're like me, you might struggle to see the exact links with what we had before. It does seem like the melody that we had, or the theme that we had highlighted as a reoccurring theme, doesn't seem like it is in there. And indeed, we've really got this scaled back, just Fs to begin with. Just a pattern that kind of holds the same stately sense, holds the same tempo, holds some of the same feel, but that melodic shape, of course, is not going to be present here. We've also got this undertone instruction, which is going to make the dynamics feel a lot less when we get into this part. A lot of these leaping figures as well in the piano part is going to support that. And really, everything is very quiet as you go through this particular variation. So the analysis is not too tricky in here. Most of these bars, most of these measures will fit within D major triads. There are some funny intervals again, so look out for example, here with a G sharp to D, that's a diminished fifth. So things like that are going to make it a bit trickier to decide whether there's some kind of passing note there, or whether this is part of the same thing. It could be part here of a chord E, G sharp, B, D, but of course not all of those notes are really sounding together, so it might not sound right if you play it slow motion, but it could give you that overall impression of a major second or major supertonic chord. The texture of this increases as it progresses, so you still have the same patterns in the strings, but you've now got both the violin and the cello playing together, and the piano is lots more busy here. I imagine for a piano player this is quite difficult to do, or quite difficult to learn at least, because you've got quite a range of intervals in there, lots of thirds, a couple of fourths, not always doing the same things in both hands, quite a lot to go on there, and still a really low dynamic level. Had a crescendo here, but it's still pianissimo as you get into bar 37. There is another kind of unusual chord as we get towards the bottom of this page. It's another one with chromatic notes. Again, we've got the F here, F natural to D sharp. That's going to be one of those augmented sixths again. So a few places to look out for these. It tends to happen where there's not a lot of chromaticism going on, but something where often both notes will need a chromatic alteration for you to be able to spot that augmented sixth. But those are useful to be able to look out for. They're those oddly specific things that can take a long time to find if you had an exam question to look for one of those. So within this, I don't have a lot else to comment on within this variation. We kind of get that cadential extension a little bit with some passing chords here as we go towards the end, but very much, or rather before we get to the end, we get this G major, brief G major section. So a lot of times we've got the modulations or brief modulations from D to A. In this case, we're going the opposite way. We're going to G and then coming back later. So it's really kind of preparing for whether we're going to do that in the next variation or not. And let's find out, see what's going on. Again, we've got those double bar lines. So this is going to be the place where variation 2 starts. Now it doesn't stay in G. We've kind of got that hint of G major on the last few bars of variation 1, but in variation 2 we're really back on D major from the beginning. And this is more of a chorale type of texture. We get a little bit more interaction, a little bit more dialogue between the strings. But the piano is not really part of that. The piano is doing its own thing, providing those chords alongside this new pattern. So this also continues for some time. The real distinguishing thing for this variation is that dialogue. Not all of the variations will have this. This is something that stands out, not only because the dialogue happens in the first place, but the piano is actually going to come and join in with this as well. So you've almost got these two pairs, the cello and the lower part of the piano and the violin with the upper part, kind of working together, playing in octaves, but far enough away that the other part is going to be significantly lower or higher than it. So you've got this conversation not only between two instruments, but between almost four characters, even though it's just the three instruments. Again, as you go through this, the harmony is fairly straightforward, that mostly it will fit into triads, some sevenths, and some, again, with that major supertonic, the E major, which doesn't really belong in D major, but it's being chromatically altered to include that here. It could be suggested that this has a sort of string quartet feel, just because of that idea of having four characters, two sets of two characters, and that really comes as you get further on as well. So you get more of this dialogue between two parts again, while we've got independent parts going on in an accompaniment manner as well. So this is really going to lead them to start to come together around here in bar 82, where we get a lot of this contrary motion, but playing the same rhythms, playing the same sorts of intervals, and bringing that to a more unified situation to come towards the end. So the end, of course, is another double bar line, another section for us to mark out as variation 3. So to split these, I'm going to put variation 3 in the next video. So come back and look at that to see what we have happening next.